Thank you. My name is Jerry Beverland. I'm on the council for the city of Oldsmar, and also I've been a resident in Oldsmar for about 27 years. And we want to welcome you back to the continuing saga of the history of Oldsmar with some of the residents that was there at the time of its founding, and some that came a little later, and some that came a little later than that. This morning we have not only myself but three guests, and I'm going to introduce them to you. And as I introduce each one of them, I'd like them to just tell you when they came to Oldsmar and just a little bit about the history of them coming to Oldsmar. Then we'll get into some more discussion about the actual history of Oldsmar. To my immediate left is Rosemary Sellers, and to her left is Bud Lister, and to his left is Bob Keller. And we'll start with Rosemary, and if you'll tell just a little bit about when you and Vic came to Oldsmar.
Well, if I remember correctly, it was around Christmas time of 1948. See, we were married in April of 1948, and he said, we're moving to Florida. Florida? Okay, I said, but I hope I like it, and I did.
From Oklahoma.
From Oklahoma, yeah. And I liked Florida the minute I saw it, so he was lucky that I did. So here we are. We're still here.
Okay.
Well, I came to Oldsmar with my father. I was about 14 in 1930. So, but, however, I had lived in Sonoma, which is not too far from there, so I knew about Oldsmar at that time. And I've been there ever since. As far as I can tell, I'm almost the oldest continuous resident of Oldsmar. There's one colored fellow that's a little older than I am. And another fellow that came before I did, but he went away for a while, so I told him he lost his seniority.
Who was that, Lon?
Lon Gamble.
Lon Gamble.
Lon Gamble. Oh, yeah.
Bob?
I came to Oldsmar in 1919 with my parents, and they came to Oldsmar with R.E. Olds to build the Oldsmar tractor plant. My father and grandfather were in the foundry business in Michigan, and Olds contacted them to come to Oldsmar and put up a foundry and machine shop where they built tractors and grove heaters. So there's been a lot of changes in Oldsmar. I left Oldsmar in about 24, but I still feel that Oldsmar is where I grew up.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Bob also still lives in Pinellas County, though, so he didn't go too far from Oldsmar. So what you see is what we're going to have this morning is one person that came here the time it was founded, one came right after it was founded, and another family that came about the middle ways, and then I'm going to bring up the tail end of the thing, but that's fine. In 1916, just a little recap, in 1916, R.E. Olds came to Florida with the grand dream, and he bought approximately 37,000 acres of land, mostly in Pinellas County. Some of it was in Hillsborough County. But a lot of people doesn't realize that some of the land that that R.E. Olds bought was in Safety Harbor and was in Clearwater. So Clearwater and Safety Harbor doesn't really know this, but they almost became a part of Oldsmar. Bud, why don't you explain the vast expanse of where Oldsmar's land was?
Yeah, I've done a little historical research on this since I'm kind of halfway the amateur historian of Oldsmar, and the city has given me a place to maintain this material that I gather up now. This map that you are looking at, which I assume you're looking at, is what I have laid out from the results of searching the records in Hillsborough and Pinellas County. The blue area down at the bottom is Tampa Bay, the north end of Tampa Bay, and the upper end is the Pasco County line, approximately 12 miles in a straight line going north and south, and about 6-8 miles east and west. He also bought property in Clearwater and in Philippi Park. He owned a whole lot of what is now Philippi Park, and some parts of Hillsborough County out at Citrus Park. So he had a tremendous amount of land. Much of it was under cypress swamps, but he had a huge amount along Tampa Bay, which is a very beautiful part of Pinellas County, and is practically all developed now. We're proud of what Mr. Olds bought, and hope that it will develop as he had visualized it, with people working in the foundries and factories around there and living on Tampa Bay.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do is, Bud went around the last couple of days and went to City Hall and to some of the residents of Oldsmar, and he asked them to write out questions what they would like to know as we were conducting this meeting. So I'm going to ask some of these questions in a little while, and we'll just expound on them. The grand design that REOs had for Oldsmar was hampered a number of ways. A depression hit, that hampered the growth. The massive hurricane of October 1921 almost destroyed the town. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. But I suppose the worst thing that hit Oldsmar, and people wouldn't think about this, was Courtney Campbell Causeway. To get from Hillsborough County into Pinellas County, you had to come around through Oldsmar. And whenever they built the Courtney Campbell Causeway, actually it was called the Davis Causeway at the time. It was the Davis, and I believe it was a privately owned causeway that the man built and charged a fee to go across. So, and then the state came in and bought it from him. So there's a little bit of history for you. But when the Davis Causeway was built, that kind of sent Oldsmar down the drain, because no one had to drive through Oldsmar anymore to get into Pinellas County. So it hurt for many years. And in fact, when I moved here, I could lay out on 580 or Tampa Road all day long and never have a car come by to hit me. Now, I can't get out of 580 from Pine Avenue. And I know, Rosemary, you can't get out, and Bud, you can't get out. So of course, Bob doesn't have to worry about it, but we have about 30,000 people going through the city every day now. Well, let's get into some of these questions, and then I'll go back and some more questions to ask. But I wanted to show this to everybody. I found this at a flea market, and it says Charles P. Bland, Oldsmar, Florida. I guess this was made back in the 20s. It's just a little paperweight lion. Now, who is Charles P. Bland, Bud?
Charles Bland was a Prettyman associate.
Now, who's Prettyman?
Prettyman and Bland developed the real estate in Oldsmar in the early 20s. They bought it from Olds and were the promoters. Oldsmar really promoted and started the Florida boom in the early 20s. They had signs all the way to go into St. Louis, and they bought buses, people down in train loads, and took them out to Oldsmar, and had big barbecues, and they did all the things that the promoters did at that time to encourage people to buy land. They had a pretty good sized yacht. They'd go over to St. Petersburg and bring people back. They'd send the yacht down to Bahamas and bring back whiskey. Of course, that was during Prohibition. And they'd sell them land on the way. It was a big promotion, and much of the things that they promised them never developed, like the golf course and the various things. They did build a hotel, and Bob is more capable of talking about what was developed in that early time, but of course I remember a good bit of it. Were you there when Prettyman was in operation? Well, talk about Prettyman, because what I know is second-hand information.
Well, Harry Prettyman, he painted all the telephone poles from Tampa to Clearwater and Tarpon Springs, orange and blue.
That was on the old Memorial Highway, on the 10-foot road.
At the lumber yard, they made these cypress chairs that they sent all over the country advertising Oldsmar, and they would have these big barbecues. They'd have a couple of hogs and a couple of beef split and barbecue them all night, and they'd have a rodeo the next day. And down by the waterfront, that's before they built the pavilion. And then later, when they had the pavilion, they used to have their dances and everything in it. But as a kid, we used to catch blue crabs down at the bay and sell them to Mr. Prettyman's wife, because she was very fond of blue crabs. And the bay was full of oysters and crabs, and there wasn't any such thing as pollution in those days. So anything you got from the bay was good.
We're going to get into that in a minute, because one of the questions in Bud's list here is about that. Well, during this promotion, I found this kind of funny, that they would send this pleasure boat or whatever it was over to St. Petersburg and pick up the people to bring back to the city to sell land. Promotion. Well, of course, they had a lot of drinks on the boat, and the time they got the people back from St. Petersburg here to Oldsmar, they were pretty well
Happy, huh?
happy. And so I guess they could sell them some of this land that was underwater a little quicker. And a lot of the land in Oldsmar that was sold is still underwater and will forever be underwater. I know that when I first was on council back in 1973, Homer Brunson, bless his heart, was on the council, and he was always proud about these 38 lots the city owned. And he always talked about how proud that he was that the city had bought in these 38 lots. Well, I found out that these 38 lots was down by the Florida power plant underwater. And they were always going to be underwater. Anyway, that's okay. We'll get back to that in a minute. I also got some of these, which is I found kind of interesting. Here's some the Oldsmar State Bank. I was asking Bob a few minutes ago if he knew. I think it was Irving Trask. Oldsmar State Bank, 1922. Oldsmar State Bank, 1923. All these old canceled bank checks. And here's one from the Ariol's farm.
Oh.
I remember the old farm. Yeah.
The Ariol's farm.
Well, he had developed agriculture to a big extent in the early days, and that was part of the big deal, that he'd have farms where the people would raise their vegetables, a factory where they would work, and their homes in town. Were you involved in any of that agricultural part? Or your people were all in the factory? But
We were in my father, grandfather and all were in the manufacturing, but they used a tractor to till the ground out at the farm. They grew different crops. They had a big hog farm out there. This was all in Oldsmar then. Later, they took the silos and that part of it and moved it over across the county line into Hillsborough County and had a dairies over there.
that's where it was when I came in the 30s.
But it used to be back south of 580 and about halfway between downtown Oldsmar and the county line, right south of where McDonald is now.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when I first came to Oldsmar, down Lafayette, there was some land down there that I thought whoever owned that land was the luckiest people in the world. And why didn't they build a house there on Lafayette, just south of Lafayette? Fabulous woods, beautiful woods. And I just thought, you know, someday it would be fabulous to own that land. Well, I ended up owning that land. Of course, I don't have a house there, but my daughter does. But going down through that land, I found the remains of one of those silos.
Mm-hmm.
You did?
Yes. The foundation, yes. And I didn't know what it was at the time, and I found out later by you at one of our the last tapings that that's what it was. It was the silos. So that whole area down there, now you think, down on Lafayette, it looks like a Florida hammock, okay? It's large oaks, large palms. But if you think back then, it was all vacant land. That whole area down there from Lafayette south was all farms. Over into Hillsborough County was all farms. And it's hard for me to visualize that land as farmland. You walk back through there, you still see the furrows. Strange. Now, going down to the bay, had a huge banana plantation. Now, you remember the banana plantation.
Yeah. They had the big banana plantation there. Then farther west, they had a big blackberry growing area. That was to go out past the old Rex Cafe and about a quarter of a mile and turn to the left back in the bay back in there. They had beautiful blackberries and all back in there that they grew commercially.
If my wife knew that, that's where she'd be tomorrow, down with the blackberries.
That would be in the area of Unisys now, right?
Well,
Some of the property that we bought had blackberry bushes on it,
It'd
and we'd go in there and pick it.
be
We
back
didn't know
in
where
here.
they came from.
Yeah, that's where it
So
is.
that, I didn't realize that.
Planted then.
Is that right?
All right, yeah.
But I didn't realize. See, there's a lot about Oldsmar that things like this, where on top of the old Tampa Bay, that housing complex there, that whole thing was in Gladiola Farms at one time.
Oh, goodness.
well, one thing I don't think about Oldsmar, when we came there was a large sawmill there. They had wood-burning locomotives that went all on up into Pasco and Hillsborough County and brought logs all in there. And they burned the slabs, generated electric power, and they furnished electric power for Safety Harbor, Clearwater, Dunedin, and Farm Harbor.
That's good. Well, I want to get back to the railroad and the lumber camps for just a minute. But you brought up something here that I think is very interesting. A lot of people doesn't know, and I hope you're going to tell me what day it was, that Oldsmar had the power plant that serviced electricity to Oldsmar, Safety Harbor, Clearwater. When was that built?
I don't know when it was built. It was there when we came in 1919.
The power plant was there in 1919?
Mm-hmm.
That must have been built by the people that had the sawmill?
Yeah, they used it to get rid of our slabs and all.
Well,
Oh, yeah. I got a few deeds talking about the sawmill, but I haven't gone far enough to get them on the map there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me read you something. This isn't going to take long, and it's kind of comical. This is from the Safety Harbor Herald, February 15, 1924. Oldsmar light plant again fails to deliver the goods.
Yeah.
It is wish, no desire, and I don't know who wrote this, but their English and their composition of English is something like mine, okay? It is with no desire on the part of the Herald that we again are compelled to mention to our readers that owing to the breakdown of the electric lighting plant at Oldsmar again, we are again handicapped to the extent that we are compelled to omit a large amount of good reading matter that would be of interest to our readers. On Sunday last, the plant had an accident in the blowing out of a tube in the boilers, which shut off the current until late in the evening. The churches were compelled to resort to the old oil lamps, as well as the hotels and all the residents. Again, Thursday afternoon, the same accident took place at the plant of the Gulf Lumber and Power Company at Oldsmar. The town was again in darkness until about 6 o'clock in the morning. As Thursday is the day we count on largely for the running of the linotype machines and the handling of the late copy, it is plain to be seen the position that has placed the Herald in. I mean, real dramatic here. It is to be hoped that the Oldsmar Company will either soon keep the many promises they have made as regards the new equipment, or else quit and give some other concern the opportunity to give Safety Harbor adequate service. The town cannot build up with the service being rendered by the Oldsmar Company. Speed the day when a change will be had that will give the town service to be depended upon.
Well, it wasn't too long after that that it faded out because the sawmill was petering out and they didn't have the slabs to burn, so we didn't have a source of power.
So Oldsmar actually had one of the first power plants in Pinellas County.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How about
They
we
had
were
one in St.
innovative.
Pete. They had one down in St. Pete, Bayboro.
And one here in Oldsmar. I want the whole county to know this, that we were
Oldsmar.
innovative. Okay. Did TECO come and buy it out?
Yeah, Tampa Electric bought that and got the franchise. But Florida Power got into the area of St. Petersburg and Safety Harbor.
Right. There's always been a conflict between. People ask, why do we have a Tampa Exchange in the city of Oldsmar when we're in Pinellas County? Why do we have Tampa Electric when we're in Pinellas County? Well, at one time, Oldsmar was in Hillsborough County. That's why, and that's why we have these
Well, one
exchanges.
time there wasn't any Pinellas County. It was all Hillsborough
Right.
County.
You're right. You're right. You're right. That's right. It was all Hillsborough County, and then
1912 was when it changed.
right. Okay. Let's go to some of these questions that Bud has gotten, and this is what he was talking about a few minutes ago. This is from Fred Schillhauser. He's the engineer for the city of Oldsmar. What buildings and what type of manufacturing industry were located in Oldsmar, and where were they located and on what streets? So if we start, when you start, everything you can remember that was located in the city that was industrial, and where it was located.
Well, the big sawmill was north of Tarpon Road and just,
That's the Tampa Road now.
Tampa Road, and just west of where the railroad crosses it.
It was on
Yeah.
the west side of the railroad then.
It was on the west side of the railroad, and the Oldsmar tractor plant, foundry, and machine shop were on the
South,
south side of the railroad.
Where?
at the end of Washington Street.
At the
That
end of
area.
Washington. Well, that's where.
The big factory buildings that my dad went into in 1930 were located at the end of Washington Street on the Tampa Road.
Well, that's just about where the
Sign places.
Where the Heath, where it covered the area where Heath and the people that have the topper.
well, that's what. Okay.
uh,
So the tractor company was basically where Heath is now.
Yeah, it was a big area. They had big factory buildings, huge buildings, 300 foot long with one of them went back, then another one 300 or 400 feet long went off along the railroad. There was a smaller building between the two that was all glassed in. I don't know what they used that for. You remember? When Dad had a packing house in there in 1930s.
Well, they had, between the machine shop and the foundry, they used to have their core ovens where they made their cores and all.
Well, that was probably because they
And-
need a lot of light with that, wouldn't they? And so that was probably what that glassed-in building. But there was a siding there, and they presumed they got their
They got their coke and their iron by rail.
and the sawmill ships timber out.
Yeah.
How many sawmills were there? How many lumber companies? One or
There's the
two?
one big sawmill there, and then they they shipped out lumber, and they also manufactured chairs. I think Lown Gamble's father was in charge of making the chairs and all our furniture.
That was a planing mill. That was separate from the sawmill.
Yeah.
That was on what we call the south side of the railroad, right in that apex where the railroad and the highway come together on the east side of that.
Okay, well, what other large industries was there? Was there any?
No.
That was the only two big ones.
See, Oldsmar had just started.
You remember when they built the foundry and the factory buildings? Your uncles built those?
Yeah, they were built in 1918, 1919.
Huge buildings built of 2 by 12, 2 by 10 heart pine.
Didn't have to go far for the lumber because it was right there at the
there.
sawmill.
Yeah.
They used oxen to get the cypress and all out of the swamps, and they used mules for the pine and the stuff out on dry. They had these big wheeled carts that they pulled it over and put it on the wood-burning locomotive and brought it on into the plant there.
Well,
What was the place where Lown Gamble and his father had a furniture factory up on State Street? There was a big building there that burned down. Just west of where the city hall is now, and then in the fire department area.
Well, there used to be the big hotel,
Yeah.
and then next to the hotel, they had a pool hall and stuff like that. Then on the corner, they had a grocery store and all. Around that, the barber shop. Across the street was the bank. Next to the bank was a hardware and a garage. And let's see, what the heck was on down the something else on down the road.
Where was the post office?
The post office was right across from where the bank was.
Where the city hall is now?
Yes.
Where the council chambers is now?
Yeah, in that general area.
South of there, the street that run, see, I can't remember the names of the streets in Oldsmar.
That's Park Boulevard that comes in there.
Yes, on Park Boulevard, the post
Next one
office.
over is Exeter.
See, every time you turn around, they'd have another fire.
Yeah, they burned down the hotel, burned down this big building that I was talking about.
Yeah, they burned down everything but the bank.
And they had a furniture factory in there and made things like that. I remember there was a fellow up on the other end of that same block at Washington Street. And it was a two-story house, and he made furniture out of palm, the leaves of stems of palm branches.
Yeah.
And bend them around and make all kinds of furniture out of them.
Somewhere in the town, some of that furniture still exists. I've been told that if we get the historical society together, that we may be able to get a couple of the old lawn chairs, and I don't know about the palm furniture, but what Lon Gamble and his father made, there's still some of that thing.
They ship those chairs all over the country.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What type of street paving, if any, did they have?
Oyster shell?
Oyster shell. Oyster shell. Oyster shell. Okay.
You know where they got it?
Out of the bay?
Did they dredge it out or dig it out with a clamshell?
Well, some of it was dredged. Most of it was just dug out. Then there were shell pits all over where they just skimmed the dirt off the top, dug out the shells around Oldsmar there.
Well, that's what the polishing ponds are, isn't it?
For what?
Those polishing ponds back by the sewer plant. That was
Marl. That wasn't
that's
oyster
Marl.
shell.
That's right. That's
what the
Marl.
county used for
Marl.
base for the roads.
Well, Lafayette Boulevard, was it ever bricked?
Not that I recall.
See, I don't think so. I think Fred was on the impression it was bricked at one time. Those big bricks. I think those big bricks came from Tampa Road or something.
They were Tampa Road when they put in those 14-pound asphalt brick on Tampa Road.
Right.
That's when they took out the oyster shell and they widened Tampa Road out and they put oak trees and oleanders down both sides of a street.
That's a memorial highway.
Yes.
What year was this? About.
That would be
Memorialized the First World War.
it'd be in, I guess, about 21, 22 when they started putting it in there.
Before that, there was just Shell Road.
Yeah.
Before that, Tampa Road was just an oyster shell road.
That was in the same area, the same place that the Memorial Highway went in with the brick road, or was it?
Well, the Memorial Highway now, when you get the double branches, it used to go straight ahead. Now it comes out and goes farther south.
Yeah.
But the old Memorial Highway, there at double branches, went straight on to Rocky Point.
Right. Well, that's the way we used to go to Tampa. Oh, well, when I was in high school in Largo, you would go the old Memorial Highway and go through Rocky Point out to downtown on Kennedy where the statue is with the big eagle. Yeah. I asked this Bud a little while ago, and he said it was there when he came. The first water system. You know anything about that?
What did people do for water?
We caught rainwater and had cisterns, and
You caught rainwater that had cisterns?
yeah, and you strained mosquito larvae out of it. If you were fortunate enough to have running water in your house, you had a big piece of cheesecloth over there for the water to come through to get the larvae and all out of it.
Sounds like where I come from in Idaho.
The house across the street from where I live now is where we first went in. Conklin lived there. And there was a huge cement tank above ground.
Cistern.
And the eaves took all the water down into that cistern. Now, I think most people had wells too, didn't they? Said the house where I am, the bank's house, that has a well.
Yeah, most of them had a shallow well. They didn't have deep wells. Then they just had shallow wells. Most of them had a rainwater tank that they caught the rainwater. But
Well, do you know when the first water system was put in?
I remember when they put a 2-inch line in front of our house there. That must have been in the early 20s. Yeah.
Did Prettyman put in the water system?
See, they put in the water system, and they had curbs and sidewalks all over out in the woods out there.
And they're still there.
They're still there, and that's when the boom busted.
Okay.
But they put in the water system and put in all these road right-of-ways and all, and paved everything, had street markers out.
Well, that brings me to another question in just a minute, but I want to get back to this one. The water system was connected to the big water tank by the railroad tracks?
Yeah.
Is that where the water, that's the one Lon Gamble would run every day and then pump the water up into the tank and then continue his run? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
That was where water was when I came in 1930.
Okay, now where was the water tank? I know it was down.
It was on Marlboro
Denmark.
and Bayview.
Marlboro and Bayview, right there on the corner.
About a half a block on the west side of that block.
Well, where the funeral home is now?
Yeah, across the street from the funeral home. It was a 4 or 5 inch, 6 inch well that went down, and they had a high tank. And when I came there, that's where all the water was, and they tried to aerate it to get the sulfur out of it, because there's a lot of sulfur out of the ground. Water you got out of the ground is sulfur water.
It sure was, because you'd make coffee out of it and it'd taste like rotten eggs sometimes.
Well, the people today that move, okay, you newer people that move into the Pinellas County, you have never had the pleasure of drinking untreated Pinellas County water. Well, I came to Florida in 1945 or 1946 in Largo.
It was sulfur.
And I liked to thirsted to death before I finally was forced to drink some water. You talk about stink. I mean, you're right, rotten eggs. Terrible sulfur. I mean, chunks of sulfur. Unbelievable.
I know my parents came to visit us after we were down here a while, and my mother said, "What in the world did you do to the coffee?" So, that was that sulfur water.
You say nothing. And you tried to, and they tried to aerate the water, you said?
Yeah, they had the water go up into the tower, but the tank was open with screen wire around it to keep the bugs out of it.
Okay.
And they would spray the water up into the top of the tank and then fill it down, and that tended to aerate and get rid of some of the sulfur. We had a terrible time keeping that screen there because the sulfur would eat it up all the time.
So you're lucky you never had to drink sulfur water. Terrible, terrible.
Well, people came from all over to Safety Harbor to bathe in that sulfur water for the mineral and the
benefits.
medical
Well, that doesn't say
benefits.
much for him as far as I'm concerned. I'm telling you, that's the stinkingest. My wife, when she came, she had to drink Cokes. And that was back in the 50s. She couldn't drink the water. She had to drink Cokes. Anyway.
Let me pose one thing. When we came to Florida in 1919, we went all over Florida. And I can recall that everywhere you go, particularly in the south of here in South Florida, you'd find sulfur water wells that we
Artesian
way
well.
up into the air.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Those are all gone. The water table's 30 feet down or 40 feet down now.
Over in Largo, when we came into 46, there was just a couple dairies out there, and we would go out to fish. As you come down East Bay Drive, down the hill, there was a creek that went there. It's still there, but it's it's nothing but a drainage ditch now. But we'd go down there and go back out in the fields to the south.
Back out there at Donnigan's.
Donnigan's Dairy, thank you. Donnigan's Dairy, yes. Many happy times on Donnigan's Dairy. Have sulfur springs coming up out there. Donnigan's Dairy, yeah, you're right. Fred, it wasn't Fred that asked this, it was Nick Stasko. He's the planner for the city, but I wanted to get to this question because of what you had said a few minutes ago about the curbing. And his question is, why were the right-of-way of the streets in Oldsmar so wide for 1924? If anybody knows, well, y'all will know, but a few people don't know that the right-of-ways of the average street in Oldsmar is about 80 to 100 foot. I mean, that is wide. In fact, it used to be Pine Street I live on. Now they've changed it to Pine Avenue. I don't know why, but it's still Pine Street to me. But that's an 80-foot right-of-way. You have enough right-of-way there to put 2 lanes like you have in front of your house. Now the question is, why were they so wide? Do you know?
Well, they had the sidewalk on both sides. All of that stuff out in the woods out there. We kids used to skate for hours on brand new concrete.
How'd they make the concrete? They didn't have come in and ready make stuff.
They had a mixer with a hopper in it. And they had so many hoppers of sand, so many hoppers of gravel, and so many hoppers of cement, and so many buckets of water, and the hopper picked up and dumped into it, and they wheeled it out Georgia buggies and dumped it.
Wheeled it out and dumped it.
They had a gasoline engine driving it.
Yeah.
You know, I would estimate at that time there's probably 6 to 8 miles of sidewalks that they built in the city of Oldsmar back then, whenever they did it. And they did it all by hand.
They just dug up some in front of my house,
Yes.
put new sidewalks down, and been there ever since.
Those right-of-ways were all graded with a scoop and a mule, too.
All graded with a scoop. Oldsmar just got new sidewalks, probably about 4.5 miles of sidewalks. And it took them about 3 months to do it. And nothing was done by hand, believe me, except the leveling out. I mean, everything was done by, they bring in the, they take the tractor, and usually they just had a mule and a log or something.
A scoop.
Like that.
They had 2 handles on the back. They just scoop it till it got full, and push down and skid it until it got where they want to go, and dump it over, and then
Take it again. And a lot of those sidewalks are still there. I mean, you
that's
go
good
out,
concrete.
you can go out walking in a field somewhere and run across the sidewalk, and you think, well, what's this sidewalk doing out here?
Well, that was all Prettyman put that in.
Yeah.
Prettyman put that in, and not Olds.
No.
So Olds didn't really do a lot of this, did he?
No, he had the idea of making it a farm and industrial area.
Wait a minute. Olds, his primary objective was to make this area a farming area.
Yeah.
That's important to know.
Because he had this big experimental farm out there. They grew all sorts of crops, raised all sorts of chickens and pigs and cows. And
He had his objective was farming, and Prettyman's objective was developing.
Saw land.
You know, I think this is something that has been that we've just divided here. That I don't think you probably knew it. I don't think the average person that has anything to do with the history of Oldsmar knows this part of it.
Oh,
Because I anticipated that REOs could develop this thing just to sell it and leave, but that's not the way it happened. There you go again, bud. You're going to mess it up again.
With those streets being so wide, who was it had hired that, whoever it was?
Who designed this?
Hire those people to lay out the streets and the. That was in 1924, where you got a old map that shows the streets all laid out like a wagon wheel.
It's a beautiful thing.
well, in 24, Olds was pretty well out of it.
He was gone by then.
Yeah.
That was a Prettyman and his land
Yeah.
development company that did all that then.
Right.
Well, wait a minute now.
Who built the hotel?
Olds built the hotel.
When was that built?
It was there when we came in 1919, because we lived in it till the furniture came down from Michigan.
And the bank building was built at
Yeah.
that time. Now, as far as I've been able to figure in my getting the history together, the bank building was built in 1918, so presumably the hotel was built about the same time.
Right.
Well, then Olds did not lay out the town?
I think he laid out the original town,
Well, I
but
mean,
not all of this expansion around it. He just had the nucleus.
But he laid out the round design. That was his design.
Yeah. Because that's before Purdyman got there.
Okay, but we still don't know why he made the streets so wide.
I think he had Boston surveyors and engineers that laid it out.
Well, now you have to think about
They probably
Boston.
knew that at the time that you needed wider streets than they.
Yeah, because Boston was laid out about 225 years ago with extremely narrow
Well,
streets.
he used to lay them real narrow and crooked, so they
They knew
couldn't put
about
a
that?
gun at the end of them and shoot down the street.
Right. Right. So maybe that's why
They
he had these so
visualized then that
wide.
they needed wider streets by that time.
Okay.
Model T Fords were all over the place.
Well, this is a good time to bring this up, then I'll get back to this, to another question he had. You brought up, and by the way, this is a question in here too, but you brought up the fact that R.E. Olds was trying to develop a new type of farm, growing and a new type of products or pigs or whatever. Well, we have a street in the city of Oldsmar that seemingly nobody except Bud. Of course, Dottie Lee said she knew, but I kind of doubt that. I think she was just, where in the world did you get the name Gimgong Road? And they say, well, who in the world is a Gimgong Road? Well, Bud, fine. Did you know who it was?
No.
Okay, well, Bud finally brought me over this piece of paper. I'm going to read just a little bit from it, so everybody in Oldsmar will now know why we have a Gimgong Road in the city of Oldsmar.
I've wondered that myself.
Okay, you're going to find out. Lou Gimgong, Florida's Chinese Burbank. One who has contributed much to the success of the Florida citrus industry was a little-known Americanized Chinese man named Lou Gimgong. Lou came to this land of his dreams as a boy of 12 in the year 1872 and went on to become something of a horticultural wizard. He propagated an orange that could remain on the tree for 2 years and still be juicy, or a grapefruit able to withstand 10 degrees more cold than any other at that time. A tomato plant bearing large clusters of uniform-sized fruit, and many other achievements. For the Lou Gimgong orange, and you know what? We go to Miami every once in a while, not because I really want to, but we do go down there, and you know what we found down there?
Still find them.
The Gimgong orange. Okay. For the Lou Gimgong orange, he was awarded the Wilder Medal by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1911, the only time this medal has been given for a new variety of orange. So now we know why we have a Gimgong Road. Now, what does Gimgong Road have to do with Oldsmar? I guess it's only by speculation, and I think Bud is going to speculate for us. Go ahead.
Well, my idea is that when Olds was experimenting with this agriculture, that he got in touch with Lou Gimgong, who was living up at the land at that time, and probably talked to him and discussed with him and what kind of things he should plant down there and put his name on the streets.
Well, the tractor plant was primarily for a little tractor, but you didn't need a mule to pull the plow, for small gardens and truck gardens and all. And they built heaters for frost protection, which was for agricultural.
Okay, well, see, so I think Bud's probably right that this is how we got a Gimgong Road in the city of Oldsmar. So now, Rosemary, when everybody says Gimgong, you say, you mean, oh, Lou Gimgong? Know him well.
No, it was.
Know him well. By the way, Rosemary's husband, Vic Sellers, when he came to Oldsmar, I guess Vic, at that time or a little after that, actually owned a huge portion of Oldsmar, did he not?
Well, quite a bit, but I don't remember how much.
I think he owned a third of Oldsmar. It was on the city council trying to collect taxes. And about a third of the taxes were trying to collect from Vic.
So Vic, Rosemary and Vic had I know we have a Sellers Industrial Park there that Vic developed. So Rosemary, not in the beginning of Oldsmar, but around the middle of Oldsmar's history, well, Rosemary and Vic had a large part to do in the development of Oldsmar. So right now I'll say, well, Rosemary, thank you for at least your part of your and Vic's part of Oldsmar's continuing history. We've already established that one. There's a couple questions in here that relate to the same thing, but they're asked different ways. So we'll just put it all in one kind of question. I know you weren't here at the time, and I wasn't here, and I don't think you were, but you were. The devastating hurricane of October 1921. Okay, kind of a multi-question here. Did it reform the bay? Well, I don't think it did either. Okay. Did it do a number on the city of Oldsmar?
Really, no. It was just like the tide came in and went out. I went to school that morning. It was raining, the wind was blowing. Somebody came and knocked at the door, and Mr. Tyree, the teacher, got up, went to the door, and whoever it was, she stepped out and closed the door behind her. So all of us kids jumped out and looked out the windows, and we were right in the middle of the lake. And my mother was one of the people that came to get me, and we lived about 4 blocks from the school, and there were 5 pine trees went down while we were walking from the school home, and water from knee to waist deep. We got home, there were 4 trees in the yard, and 3 of them came down, one of them one way and 2 the other way down on the garage. And the water kept coming up. We had a big window in the front room there, and when the wind would blow, that window would give like that, so they pushed the piano across the room, put an ironing board up against the window, and took a broom and braced up to keep the window from blowing out. And we stayed in the house till around noon when the water was so high, but it was right up on the front porch. They came by, and everybody was evacuated and moved down to the 2nd store in the bank building.
What did they come with?
Just rowboats and walking. We waited and swam down there. The water came right up to the railroad, and then the tide went out. When it went out, Oldsmar was just like it was before, except maybe your furniture, porch furniture, was over in somebody else's yard, or you had a couple trees down in your yard. But as far as blowing down buildings, I don't recall a whole lot of structural damage. The Bowleses lived out on the point out there, out Ballast Point, and they came in on floating on logs and whatnot to get away from it.
You say Ballast Point. Is that now where the
It's on
banana?
the other side of Mobley Bayou.
Where the banana plantation?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what we had then is a lot of water.
The water came up 14 feet above normal.
14 feet above normal, which means where my house is now and where your house is now would be underwater. My house would be completely underwater, and yours would be almost underwater.
Down by Double Branches, it floated a house right across the fence and dropped it on the railroad track, and they had to take the house apart to get the train through when the water went down. The old wooden truss remained in, but the wooden bridge that used to run right next to the trestle, that was washed out, and you had to go on down to get over to Safety Harbor because you couldn't get across the bridge, and they built the bridge.
Okay, well, the water came up to the railroad. You know where the city hall is now,
Yeah.
the new city hall? That was all underwater.
That was all underwater.
That was all underwater.
They had a big alligator pen out in the back of that the
And they were all
alligators and all that went over the fence and got out.
gone. So the alligators left.
For the record, his house was about 4 blocks, 3 or 4 blocks from the bay.
Well, you say you were in school. Well, the school was where it's where the school is now, but the old school's gone
Yeah,
now.
St. Pete Drive.
On St. Pete.
We had the one building there. They had first, second, third, and fourth grade in one room, the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth room in the other room, and then they had high school in the hall.
That's too
Had three
bad.
teachers.
The city or somebody shouldn't have tried to save that because they tore it down about 6, 7 years ago. That was sad.
They tore down that old schoolhouse?
Yes.
I wondered what happened.
Before that, they had school in the church, not where the church is now, but there used to be a little church about a block from where Coleman's house was.
Yeah, it's where the parsonage is now.
Yeah.
Well, it was parsonage. That would be on Buckingham and Jefferson.
Buckinghamshire. Okay, well, this is another part of that question, just to approximately how deep do you think the water was on State Street where the City Hall is now?
Well, he said they went into the bank building. Did you wade into the bank building?
Yeah, it was here at the bank building. It was above your knees.
Well, you went up to the upper floor. They went up, you all
Yeah.
went upstairs.
We all went upstairs, yeah.
Okay, we've talked about the hurricane before, but this just kind of reiterates how far up it came.
Well, there was a big barge that, where the Rex Cafe used to be.
That's the old Heidelberg.
Yeah.
Oh.
That big barge
That's
was
on
out behind
Fort
there.
Boulevard and Tampa Road.
Right.
It broke loose and it ended up back behind that, so there was a lot of water.
There's a lot of water. Okay, that came off Moccasin Creek then, up around Moccasin Creek.
That's a little lower up that way, and the water went up into that
Yeah.
neck. I think it's forced up in there.
Here's a question how long did it take to travel from Oldsmar to St. Petersburg or from Oldsmar to Tampa? Of course, you only had a
Well,
shell road. And
it used to be 38 miles from Tampa to St. Pete before they put Davis Causeway in.
Around the
Yeah.
neck of the bay.
Yeah. But to go from Tampa to St. Pete, you had to go to Oldsmar, then up to Palm Harbor, up at Four Corners, come down County Road 1, through Dunedin, through Largo, through Seminole, across the Seminole Bridge.
that was old 19.
Yeah.
Old 19, which is now alternate
A
19.
lot of people would go down and they would catch the streetcar down in the Jungle Garden and then go on into St. Pete on the
All right,
streetcar.
now, Jungle Garden. I know where Jungle Garden is. That's on Park. We tell people where Jungle Garden is.
Well, I guess it's not even alternate 19 anymore, is it?
No.
I don't.
It'd be at the end of Park Street and about Tyrone Boulevard.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Park Street and Tyrone Boulevard. Remember at one time had those beautiful oaks down the middle of that?
That's where the railroad used to. The streetcar used to stop right there.
Right, and then they took all the oaks out. But you know what they just did? That was a brick street, beautiful brick
Yeah.
street. That part of it, they saved it. They just took, last year, they took all the bricks out, repaved underneath of it, and put all the bricks back.
Oh, well, I guess-
Where
So-
is that, in Tampa or?
St.
St.
Petersburg.
St. Pete?
That's
Oh,
it.
Right on the
East
water.
side of
Yeah.
St. Petersburg, over on
And
Bogus.
they have saved that part of Jungle Drive with the original little red bricks. But that's St. Petersburg. Anyway, that's where it ended up. What was y'all's first car?
We came down in an Oakland.
Say what?
An Oakland?
In Oakland?
Oakland, I remember Oakland.
I don't.
Good car.
You remember an Oakland?
Sure.
No.
Who made the Oaklands? I never heard of an Oakland. Tell me about it.
Well, it was an open touring car, And we left Michigan the day after Christmas, 15 below zero, in an open touring car. My mother and father and sister.
You wanted to get down here bad.
And it took 5 weeks to drive it because it was right after the war. All the roads were under repair, so everything was detour, detour, detour. And when you would hit a mud hole, you would hit it hard. You'd either go through or you'd get out and get somebody's mule and come pull you out.
That was a rough trip.
It took you 5 weeks to come from Michigan
To Oldsmar.
Florida. Oldsmar.
We broke 3 springs and 4 axles, and we came into Oldsmar with the steering knuckle wired up a bob wire that came out of the middle of Okefenokee Swamp, and took about 3 months to get a new one.
When you came down into Florida, what area did you come in? Were you coming along the Brooksville in that area, Dade City?
Yeah,
That's what I thought. That was the main one. What was that, 41?
41. That was the only route in those days. There wasn't any 19. There wasn't any alternate 19. There wasn't any 75. Wasn't any 4.
Well, now I can be in Michigan in 2.5 hours if I want to be, real quick, 3 hours. Or I can drive it in, what, 20 hours? 5 weeks. We have come a long ways.
Well, we used to go up to get my grandfather and grandmother in Jacksonville, and it'd take a whole day to go to Jacksonville and a whole day to come back.
That was going pretty fast. In
Yeah,
one
that
day.
was
301, up 301 and 41. Yeah. Okay, right now, these are just kind of random questions, but what family in Oldsmar dates back the longest? Well, it's got to be, well, you say you, but because
Lon Gamble.
because Lon left for a couple of days.
Yeah, Lon Gamble.
Yeah, Lon Gamble. The Gambles, they live on Washington, in the same house they've always lived in, on Washington and,
About Buckingham, near Buckingham.
no, it's one
It's
up,
between Buckingham and Arlington.
yeah. And where is he located? Well, we just told you where he was
You
located.
remember when Lon came? He went to school with Lon, probably.
Yeah.
You remember when they came?
No, I remember we used to go over to his house to play because he had trapezes and swings and all over in his yard. That's all of us kids used to hang out.
Okay, we're going to have to, I just got a message. We're going to have to go down a little bit, so. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here.
I'd like to have Rosie tell about that shotgun.
Oh, tell about the shotgun.
Oh, well, he said we're out of time, aren't we?
Well, just hurry up and tell it.
Oh, well, talking about the city well, when we came here in 40, I think it was late 48 or early 49, the city was still using that old well with the tank on top. And it was right close to the funeral home, right across where the funeral home is now, right across the street. And at that time, Vic had bought a lot of property in that same area.
That's Sellers Industrial Park now.
Yeah, but that time we called it Oldsmar Industrial Park, because it was the only one. Anyway, the State Highway Department had planned to take up the brick road and put blacktop, and they wanted to bring all the drainage off of 584 off into that area, which would come the water would come right down into the city water well. And the mayor, who was Ward Schreckengost at that time, and the others on the council, including my husband, had tried to contact the state road department to get them to change their plans, and we didn't have any luck. We even had attorneys calling them to trying to get the message through. So anyway, we never did. So when the day came that they started, I told my husband, when they start to dig on that property up there, I'm going up with the shotgun and stop them. And he says, oh. So anyway, I did. And then we got action. We got to talk to the supervisor, and the plans were changed.
And so Rosemary did it with a shotgun.
So our water well was saved.
And Oldsmar's name was from Tampa Shores back to Oldsmar again. about 1926. Anyway, I want to thank everybody, TCI and everybody that for what we've been doing with these tapings, and I think Oldsmar will have the future generations of Oldsmar will have a better understanding of the past Oldsmar because of these tapings, and I want to thank each one of you, and I think it's been great. And
Very
with
nice.
that,
I
it's
enjoyed
over.
it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. I'm learning
It's
a lot
nice,
about
nice
Oldsmar.
recalling the old days of Oldsmar. I remember when there were no fence laws. All the cattle used to come in and roam all through. Mr. Albritton, he used to ride his horse around and drive the cattle out of town.
Yeah, so it's been, the tapings
See
have
the
been
marshal?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He later had the Albritton dairy out here.
Okay.
That is great.
That's it.